Good morning. Today's Tuesday, May 14th, 2019. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioner Sobroff, Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay. On items number 1, ABC, do we have any comments from commissioners? Do we have any public comments on ABC?
We have 2 on A, 1 on B, and 1 on C.
Okay, let's hear on number A.
On number A, we have Michael Novick and Mr. Herman. And please let the record reflect Commissioner Figueroa Villa is now present.
Seeing that the same week that you're considering amending the contract with Motorola for extending their services for 5 years, the chief was in Chicago being wined and dined by Motorola at their innovation center. So I think that, in that case, let Motorola pay for it.
Mr. Herman, please.
Mr. Herman?
Good morning, Mr. Sobroff. Good morning. I'd like to place these 2 documents for the record for Mr. Sobroff and Mr. Smith, Inspector General, for the record. Thank you. With conditions regarding the Motorola expenses, I believe the public should know whether or not we're in position of whether or not this is something credible for us to be in opposition for. In the history of what Motorola has done, it's become a very successful trillion-dollar company, DBA. And usually, sometimes it's a better factor to allow other competitive companies with lesser fees to participate in the bid process so that we can engage in whether or not these expenses under personal expenses regarding, matter of fact, while we were in Chicago. Matter of fact, I don't remember being in Chicago, but the statement of Mr. Michael R. Moore, for the record, who's not here, is a reflection of what Beatrice Gurmala has warned the public, that Motorola has, personalized its DBA in our community. And as you read this agenda, it says there was no department report. Why wasn't there a department report? And why wasn't there transparency among your constituents and stakeholders, Angelenos, who would like to weigh in on this matter? Well, let me tell you why. Because we have a developer, $1 billion developer sitting in our...
We have no other cards for 1A.
I move approval of 1A. Do you have a second? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay.
For 1B, we have Gina Viola.
Agenda more frequently, there's this item to destroy obsolete original records, and I'm wondering if that's something that's happening more frequently because of the passage of SB 1421. No, you're shaking your head no. And also, are there no avenues to obtain those records once the originals are destroyed?
They're copies. Those are the originals, but they're
there
copies.
Are copies that stay.
Uh-huh.
So when SB 1421 orders come in, the copies are provided.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
We have no other cards on 1B.
I'll move approval of 1B. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. 1C.
We have Mr. Herman on 1C.
In my hand is my request of authority not to destroy obsolete duplicate records, because these records can personally decriminalize those who have engaged in criminal activity. See, managing pain. And these records contain what retaliation and harassment and threats can result into. Matter of fact, 42 U.S.C. 12101 prohibits discrimination on the basis of whether or not the public has a right to weigh in on the transparency of such documents, just like I have in my hand, a document. Thank you for the record, Mr. Smith, for participating. And as you already know, we have to de-escalate these requests to destroy property that belongs to the public. I think you need to put into the records, these records, by notifying the public through the newspaper, to the Sentinel, and through any other way and manner so the public can know that you're going to destroy them. Don't you want the public to know what's on those records? Don't you believe the public has a right to know what's on those records? The last time I was in City Hall, I made a public request to keep the records open so that I and John Walsh, God bless his soul, to observe what was on those records. And we found some facts based on budgetary facts, which criminalize people. You use a threat management or the TRO in some of these documents. So you can't just destroy personal records that belong to the public.
And we have no other comment cards on 1C.
Motion for approval on 1C. All in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to item number 2. The department's report relative to homelessness and mental illness. Morning.
Morning. Morning.
This is on MTA.
Correct. Morning, Commissioners, and morning, Chief.
Morning.
Blake Chow, Commanding Officer, Transit Services Bureau, and to my right, you probably know Commander Orb, Transit Services Group, and Sergeant Padilla. He runs our Hope detail. I'm just going to we're going to handle this presentation as a tag team, because these two individuals are really responsible for a lot of the good work and the outreach that's going on in the homeless community that is on our transit line system, as well as some of the issues we face with individuals that are suffering from mental illness. Just to give a kind of a brief history that'll kind of put this document into context. In January of 2018, the City Council Public Safety Committee met, and a motion that was introduced by Martinez and Bonin to address efforts to combat sexual harassment and sexual assault on the metropolitan system was introduced. We responded to that and provided a presentation. And during the time, some additional questions came up about how we work with MTA and our partners in the county and the city to address some of the issues we have with homelessness and mental illness in the on the trains and the buses. So we prepared a written report that was prepared on April 25th, 2018, and in January 16th, 2019, the City Council accepted the report. However, there were several other questions that came up as a result of that report, and that's the report that you see before you today. That's why the questions don't appear to be random. They were asked by them during our meeting with them. And so in general, what you're going to hear is we'll talk about sexual harassment statistics and strategies to reduce that on the metro system. We'll talk pretty in depth about some of the programs that we have going to address the homeless issues and with outreach and things like that. We'll talk about some of the coordination that you'll see between Department of Mental Health as well as Sergeant Padilla's Hope team and some of our community-based organizations. And then Commander Orb's going to kind of discuss some of the deployment strategies that we have to really, keep the line safe, which is really what our mission is with MTA. So I'll hand it over to Commander Orb.
Good morning.
Morning.
So currently, Transit Services works with Peace Over Violence. It's a group that addresses the sexual harassment issues. They have been contracted by the MTA. Their program, it's called It's Off Limits. It's a campaign that has been put forth that provides hotlines, information, leaflets, and some cards that they'll hand out to ridership. So their current agreement outlines several data requests that they report to the MTA. Transit Services has requested additional information from Peace Over Violence outside the normal reporting to determine if advocates take the incoming calls and there's any sense of patterns. One of the very important things that we are happy to report is that since we've taken over the line, Peace Over Violence has reported to us that they've had a over 70% decrease in average calls regarding sexual harassment.
When did we take over again?
The
17?
exact date was July.
I'm sorry?
July
July
2017.
2017.
17.
Yeah.
Because the numbers in here were for 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, and some of those were sheriff's reported numbers. One thing that we realized that once we took over and our deployment was significantly more than the sheriff's,
Yeah.
created much more opportunity to report these crimes to us.
That's what I thought.
So I think our numbers are very accurate, sir. Again, as I said, that they were reporting to us a 70% decrease in the average calls, and we've noted that through our contacts with Peace Over Violence as well. So MTA also hosts a sexual harassment hotline, and we're looking at continuing to redefine and identify trends in the data to best serve the locations where we could identify, any particular line that has a significant problem or any bus or rail, and that's how we adapt our deployment to address those concerns. If there is any type of active incident or crime that's involving sexual harassment or sex crimes at all, we looked at in our daily and weekly meetings, and we will deploy based on that. And we do have a couple of success stories I could address as we go forward. We participate as well in working groups with MTA system security and law enforcement, and in those groups, we address Metro's Women and Girls Council on how to make the system safer overall, with an emphasis on the riders, including and installing blue light systems for reporting incidents while on the system. MTA is also going to launch a bystander program for all frontline employees. So there's a protocol to report incidences. So the bus drivers or any of the other service folks within the MTA will be trained in how to receive that information and what to do it once they get it. So we continue to work with the MTA board regarding an exclusionary program whereby those have been convicted for transit-related crimes to be excluded from the system. I wanted to cite one of the incidents that we have based on that, where we had a individual who was very prolific and involved in sexual batteries along the line. We were able to identify him. He was a 290 registrant. He had multiple incidents of sexual batteries on the rail. He was arrested, brought to court, and convicted on those crimes. And in that, we were able to exclude him off the rail for the behavior. But he was not excluded from being on the bus line. So he moved his activity to the bus line. Because of the involvement in our detectives, we were able to identify him relatively fast and arrest him on sexual battery crimes that were occurring on the bus. And he was excluded off there. So, the systems that we have in place are very, very good at identifying the prolific individuals and bringing them to justice on those cases. And that's kind of the method that we use. As far as deployment goes, currently our homeless outreach program, our HOPE, and we have Sergeant Padilla here. He operates with 9 officers. We have 3 special problems units with 6 sergeants and 9 officers. We'll be adding another sergeant and another 4 officers. so we could have coverage in all 4 bureaus. So that's what our goal is on that. We have 1 sergeant and 5 senior lead officers. Our total daily deployment is 24 supervisors and 128 officers, and those are all coast overtime officers that are used in the daily deployment. And since April, MTA came to us and asked for additional resources to be put on the line to assist with the ridership concerns and complaints and to address some of our crime issues. And that added another 6 plus 40 to our daily assignment, which totals the 30 supervisors and 168 officers a day, and, covering a very large system. So,
Is our authority changed when the train goes outside the 4 corners of the city of Los Angeles?
no. Anytime it leaves, what we normally do is follow protocols established by whatever area we're in. So if a crime does occur on that, what we'll do a detention and then report it to that agency, and they would take over the criminal investigation.
Okay.
So that is the sexual harassment portion that I have. I'll turn it over to Sergeant Padilla for the homeless issues.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
So some of the things that we've been working on as we continue to develop our relationship with MTA is bringing a lot of what the HOPE teams were already doing in the 4 geographic areas. So we brought a lot of partnerships with us and a lot of processes. One of the things that was asked of us was if MTA was going to fully adopt a cleanup protocol. And we were able to get them to basically adopt a protocol that mirrors the city's efforts, just with different partners, because they're contracting out all their partners. And the only real significant difference is they have a 14-day posting versus a 3-day. So it gives a lot more time for outreach, gives a lot more time for environmental changes, considerations for other investments they want to make in that property to try and improve it or whatever else. And it gives us opportunity to bring multiple partners to attempt outreach. So if there's someone that's more familiar with that particular area of the city, they have connections and resources in that immediate area, we found that it's more helpful than just going with one provider. So we have adopted that. Our actual first posted cleanup is being conducted this week. Started yesterday.
Good.
So far, through yesterday, everything has gone well. Everyone had plenty of opportunity to accept resources, so we've had no pushback from anyone. It also gave MTA an opportunity to address personal property, which hadn't been something they'd done in the past. So that piece has pretty much been resolved. Another piece we looked at is we look at every component of homelessness is the mental illness piece. And something I've realized now doing this for 3 years is there's a lot of people that aren't in crisis yet that really could use some help getting reconnected to outpatient services with family, getting help on putting together a good mental health plan. So we were able to, with the assistance of Chief Gramala, get a DMH clinician connected now to my unit, and their sole purpose is to address people pre-crisis. So not for somebody who's already in crisis that we already know how to handle, but for someone who's not in crisis yet, to see how we can get them reconnected to services, whether they've just fallen out, haven't been evaluated for a while, family has issues with, dealing with a family member when they are in crisis. There's a lot of things that can be done before they're actually in crisis, and it's proved to be a great tool. We had an opportunity to do a 3-month pilot at the end of last year. It was very successful, so I'm glad to see that we have that permanently as part of our unit now. But to take it a step further, I met with USC. There's 2 different programs we're working with there. One is their telehealth program, which allows people to get counseling via electronic device. So what I'm hoping to do is present that eventually to the county and see if we can get it maybe into some libraries and other county buildings to make that service available to some of the homeless that are out there. But the other piece is they have an intern program, and some of them are already assisting our department in Skid Row, some of our youth programs, and they've committed to providing me with 1 to 2 interns next school year. So that hand in hand with a DMH clinician will give us a little more ability to cover a larger area and get some services to people that, like I said, aren't in crisis. Outside of that, we also have a pretty significant growing veteran program. One of the things that I realized is we had lost contact with a female veteran that we were trying to get connected to services. She's an honorable discharge, has a lot of benefits available to her, but she also has an addiction issue. Another barrier is that she's part of a unmarried couple, and they don't want to separate. So those typical standard challenges that we see a lot. But the fact that we couldn't get her connected to services is what was the challenge. So the more I looked into it, come to find out that there's a lot of female veterans that don't want to admit to being veterans. They don't want to pursue their benefits. They don't want to get back into the system because they've had issues, whatever it might be, whether it be military sexual trauma or other things. They just don't want to go back. So I identified and partnered with a lot of organizations that focus on female veterans outside of the VA. So we kind of have a stepping stone to get them back and connected to their benefits. So that's spun off into veteran suicide and a handful of other projects. So we have a lot of that going as well. MTA, as well as us, we're continuing to expand our faith-based partnerships, and that includes everything up to and including wraparound services. So we're actually part of a program that provides welcome home kits for newly housed homeless. So I provide those welcome home kits to the DMH Skid Row team, LA Family Housing, PATH, and a lot of other organizations that are involved in housing the homeless, whether it be individuals or families. We have a lot of other things going on. I mean, we always do. A lot of the issues that we deal with are very similar to what we're dealing with throughout the rest of the city. Big challenge for us remains information sharing, being in law enforcement and perspective from outreach organizations. There's just a lot of times it's difficult for us to get information to help us help people that are out on the street, and vice versa. There was an assembly bill that was passed at the beginning of last year, AB 210, that would have created a homeless team, which would have included law enforcement and probation. The first phase has been rolled out by the county, but doesn't really include law enforcement. So I've made several attempts to try and get our foot in the door with that. I haven't made a whole lot of progress. So I did reach out to Assemblyman Santiago's office to find out what the intent of that bill was when they drafted it. And the intent was that law enforcement would be very involved in that. So they're reaching out to the county, and I'm just waiting for a response back on that, on how we can improve that piece. The only other thing, I'd like to say, just kind of give a quick example of some of the successes, a success story. It's a lengthy one, but I'll keep it short. And all of it really has to do with partnerships, is we encountered a Navy veteran. He was born in Africa. He won a lottery to come here to the United States. He was so grateful to be here that he elected to join our military. He served honorably in the Navy, and after getting out, he had a job for a short period of time, lost the job due to downsizing, kind of fell between the cracks, and that was that. He basically accepted that he'd likely die in the streets of Los Angeles. His main goal was he wanted to get back to family, but all of his paperwork had expired. So his visa had expired. His opportunity to become a citizen here because he'd served in the military, that had expired. So all of his identification, everything, his identity, very difficult to get him connected to services. PATH had a short success with him, but couldn't get past a lot of the documents that he needed. So Transit Hope officers happened to encounter him on the Expo line as part of a complaint that we had received. They built a rapport with him, and without reaching out to any other agencies, just based on the knowledge that they've now gained in dealing with the homeless, they reached out to, turns out there's an honorary Togolese consulate here in the San Fernando Valley. So they reached out to them, who in turn reached out to the embassy. We were able to get him all his documents without him having to fly out to Washington. We secured travel documents for him. We passed the hat around basically within the LAPD and got the money for the flight. My officers happened to be telling this story to an actress, Hollywood actress, who covered money for a motel stay until his travel date. PATH and some other agencies stepped in to make sure he was clothed, fed, had cash. We made sure that he connected with his family on the other end, and we're finishing up the final things that we need to make sure he gets his financial benefits that he was entitled to here abroad. So someone who had been homeless for probably close to 10 years collectively, returned back to his family. A lot of work, a lot of expertise, a lot of partnerships went into it, but that's just an example of some of the things we're doing.
Thank you. Do we have any commissioner questions on the report? Okay.
Sure, yeah, thank you for the comprehensive report, and I really appreciate the
Hold on for a second. Herman, there's a camera behind you, so when you hold up signs or wave your hands, it's disruptive. So don't do that again, please. Yeah.
I appreciate the comprehensive approach that you're taking to address these issues and, de-emphasizing enforcement and emphasizing services and prevention. And I'm interested in the work around cleaning up encampments that you referred to in your partnership with sanitation. And I know we've talked about this a little bit just broadly in terms of LAPD and sanitation in addressing cleanups, but I don't know that we've totally nailed it down. So I'm curious about the protocols, at least in your case with Metro, in terms of what if any protocols exist for outreach in the 14-day period, and what is the criteria used to determine whether to take enforcement action and what action to take?
Go ahead, Mike.
So going back to the protocol piece, like I said, it pretty much mirrors the city's efforts. Basically what I did is I connected MTA to our city attorney and sanitation so they could see what the exact process is for the city. The difference being that we don't have the ability to enforce 5611. So it's a non-issue. MTA really doesn't have to provide any warning, and they don't have to provide any mechanism to address personal property, but at our request, they decided to go ahead and pursue that. So if you look at sanitation's protocol and MTA's protocol, they're almost identical with the exception of the partners. So instead of being LASA and Bureau of Sanitation, it's their outside contractor and their internal environmental and PATH, who they contract. So as far as the outreach component, it's pretty much the same. They want at least 3 contacts, 3 attempts to go out there and conduct a comprehensive outreach by PATH before it's signed off to conduct the cleanup. But we always have other partners that we're taking to those locations anyway. So for example, the cleanup that we have going right now is on the Slauson corridor, and we have PATH who satisfied, I believe, 4, and then the day of the cleanup. But we also reached out to West Angeles Church, which is out there, that have a lot of resources as well. They were both very successful. Couldn't address everyone, unfortunately, because there's not resources that fit everyone in a short period of time. But we definitely found that 2 weeks is a lot better than 3 days for us to address the outreach effort. But my officers have been out there conducting outreach and bringing in providers for months. So it's not just the cleanup.
Right.
That's just the document we had to satisfy. But efforts have been ongoing for several months.
That's great.
As far as the enforcement and when do we take that position, really it comes down to crime and criminal element, public safety. In that particular area, for the most part, we didn't have a whole lot of crime except for one small piece, and it was impacting not only the community but also the local businesses. So it definitely got more emphasis there, and first with the outreach. But if it was unsuccessful or we had criminal element, then we would address it sooner rather than later. We have some locations that we have a lot of people bringing in narcotics. We have to address quickly. We have others where gang activity has started to fall into place. We have some that have human trafficking issues. So anything that's a public safety or interferes with operations, like homeless may cut a fence, seems pretty innocent, but they're using it to shortcut across train tracks. We have to address that right away. We have to move them away from the property. So it's things like that. Public safety and criminal activity is what's going to cause us to look for enforcement sooner.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the proactive approach that you've taken, particularly getting MTA to do the warnings even though they're not required to.
Commissioner Decker? Okay, Commissioner Bonner.
Thank you very much. First question, before I get to a few in the report itself, I wanted to ask the commander. You mentioned, if I heard you correctly, that with regard to people who are involved in sexual assault activity, that they're excluded from the system. If I understood that correctly?
Yes, we had one right now, but moving forward, that's what we're working with the MTA to address. You know, that individuals that are using that as their primary means of committing crimes.
Can you explain, just practically speaking, how do you exclude someone from, so I can see how you can do that on paper, but since you don't show identification and go through screening and those kind of things, how practically speaking do you
it's more of a contempt of court, like a restraining order, keeping them restrained from the MTA line or property. And so it would be more of a court order keeping them or banning them from using those services.
And if I may add, also at each roll call, as officers cycle through these overtime details, they're provided very detailed briefing on individuals of or persons of interest on the rail line, in addition to crime trends, and it's very comprehensive. So that information is available to officers as well. So as they're looking at the 93 stations and over 98 miles that the officers must cover, the attention and focus and timeliness of information, such as these suspects involved in sexual assaults, is also put out to them.
Does it require legal process
Yes,
on the
it
front
does.
end in order to get the exclusion, so to speak, in
Yes,
place?
Mr. Bonner. It's somewhat similar to stay-away orders that we get for specific locations throughout the city, in conjunction with the legal advice and counsel of the city attorney's office.
Thank you. I wanted to go on to page 3 of the report, and this is and that with regard to better coordinating resources. And there's a comment to the effect that some of the other providers are concerned. There's restrictions on sharing information, under HIPAA and other confidentiality statutes, and there's a concern amongst providers that about sharing some information that might be used for enforcement purposes. And the question is it? Under what circumstances is any of this kind of information used for enforcement purposes? Is there any history of that one way or the other?
There isn't. We when this HOPE team was developed, I happened to have the opportunity to run the first one in the Valley, the first one that we had here with LAPD. And the mission has always been to connect people to services, support cleanup efforts, and enforcement as the last resort. I think now, 3 years into it, we've shown across the city, if you look at the numbers of contacts, people that are connected to services, and the amount of enforcement or lack of, and the type of enforcement that we do, it typically revolves around felony crime, serious crime, violent crime. It's not, the low-end citation or anything like that. The reality is we've actually looked for opportunities to use citations or anything else for in-reach through the city attorney's office, through the jail system, to help clear warrants, ticket clinics, what have you. I think that mentality comes from well before HOPE teams and a lot of these other efforts, reset and wherever developed. I think when we had less tools and we weren't looking at it from the perspective we do now, and not just LAPD, across the country, enforcement was our only tool. And so I think the concern was, from an outreach perspective, we don't necessarily want to work with the police and have it result in somebody we're working with be arrested. Now it's the exact opposite. Now it's actually us reaching out to them if you can do something so we don't have to go down the enforcement road. So there's never been a time that I'm aware of, as we've been doing this and been so much more entrenched, where we've used information from anyone else to effect an arrest.
And Commissioner, if I could just add, one of the things with the community-based organizations, Peace Over Violence, they had a lot of information about where and who things were happening to on the line that we needed so that we could deploy our resources. And Mike had built an outstanding relationship with them. And when they first met, they were really a little bit apprehensive about giving us any sort of data about what they were seeing, because they thought that we would target that with enforcement. But over the course of time, Mike built a relationship with them, and they realized we were just using it to try to get a bigger picture about what is really happening on the line. And so they've got this really close relationship now where they kind of let us know what they're hearing as people report things to them.
And are those, just by curiosity, and those arrangements, are they based on the personal rapport of the individuals involved, or are they institutional in nature? So I've seen situations where two organizations may sign an MOU or may agree formally that they're going to do one thing or the other. Which is the case here?
It's more informal. I mean, the reality is, and it's very similar to the outreach perspective. I mean, people who are advocates, like in their case, they advocate for women, and they don't want to risk that we treat the victim like a suspect or anything. And they want to be able to do their job. They want to maintain the confidentiality and the trust. And so they weren't accustomed to the amount of information that we were asking. And the information that I was asking is very generic, but it paints a picture for us of locations, victim demographics, things like that would be important for us. But I think by helping them improve their script and them in turn helping us improve ours, it's provide a lot of valuable information not only to us but to MTA. And in seeing what we were asking for and why, we've built a great relationship with them, but it's very informal. I mean, the MTA contract with them helps support it. So that helped formalize at least the questions that I wanted them to ask, just so we could have that information, because just a train line or time of day was important. You know, they didn't necessarily see the importance of that. So, yeah, at this point, it's still informal. It'd be great if it was institutionalized across the city, but have to start somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
And just one thing, Mr. Bonner, in addition to that, when we have the relationships, for example, with Peace Over Violence, we're not looking for specific information. There's no breach of confidentiality. We treasure those relationships. They are the foundation of our ability to provide services out there. What we look for is just general trends and patterns that they could tell us based on individuals who have come to them for services. For example, if they would have a dozen people that frequent one particular line, and now we become aware that there is a trend and pattern of victimization there. But we are very, very sensitive, not only legally speaking, but ethically, that we do not at all put them in a position to breach those confidentialities. And that has to be the basis of the relationship, or quite frankly, there is no relationship.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Top of page 4, you indicated that, and the report indicates that it was expected that that with the passage of AB 210 that there would be improved information sharing. And I take it from your comments today and from the way the report is written that that's not been the reality, or?
That's correct. Like I said, it took the county several months to roll out the first phase of that, and there's training to go along with it. And I'm sure there's still going to be issues even between service providers, because they do have confidentiality agreements that they have people sign when they complete CS packages or a variety of other intakes that they do. So they're still going to have to work around that piece. But the law enforcement piece, as far as I know, the only piece that's in there right now is small one-way information sharing from the sheriff's department outward to determine whether or not somebody has a warrant or some type of pending case that would prevent them from accepting services. But to have a comprehensive exchange of information is not on the table. It's not documented anywhere. I've had several conversations with the county and the CEO of that project. Haven't made any progress. So like I said, just recently I reached out to the Assembly office just to get clarification on the intent and waiting for their response back. But my understanding is that they will press to get law enforcement involved. I just don't know what that's going to look like.
Okay, thank you. On page 7, there's a indication that the HOPE officers, I believe each of the HOPE team members gets 40 hours of mental health training that's provided by the department. And the question is it only and I may not understand fully how this works, but is it only the HOPE officers, or is every officer that is deployed to work in the Metro system under this contract undergo some sort of mental health training?
Well, I believe we're trying to accomplish it for the entire department. It's just with HOPE officers, it's a mandate in order for them to work that assignment.
So when you say the entire department, that means then that it would include officers who are assigned to the Metro contract and presumably all others at some point in time. So that would capture everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Bonner, on that, Detective Bureau's Mental Evaluation Unit is in charge of that training. The 40-hour course that Sergeant Padilla is referring to, it is given every second week of the month, and it is something with the goal in mind of having the entire department trained on this 40-hour intensive training. And it's multifaceted. It engages partners from the community, from various disciplines, including those who experience working with people with autism. It's a life-changing experience for the officers who are fortunate enough to have already gone through the training. And if at any point you would like to observe that, we welcome all the commissioners, if those who have not seen it, to come for any portion of that. The trainers are quite accomplished and have been recognized nationally.
Absolutely, thank you. Do we make sure at least, because I'm going to assume that all 10,000 or so officers have not yet completed the training, but are we making sure that at least before anyone is assigned to work in the Metro system, that they at least have had that training before are they given some priority or at least assurance that they go there with that training?
Because we go through the COAST system, that's the overtime system set up to get the 144 officers, more or less, that we need daily. Some have been through the MHIT training, some have not, but all are familiar with the department policies and procedures with regard to dealing with people with who are experiencing mental illness, and that is ongoing training that we have, not that 40-hour intensive course. We have some officers that have been through it, but not all have been through that course.
Is it possible or even appropriate to have a mechanism that does ensure that everyone goes through it? So if I understand that, at least for some of the work that is still based on overtime, that's volunteer, some of them are volunteering, right? So could you have a situation where, in order to be eligible to work in the Metro system, that you have to have completed the 40 hours of training?
Because of the randomness of the officers that do the different shifts, it would be very difficult now. The department goal has truly been to get all 10,000 officers trained in this, but I think it would be prohibitive to us being able to fill the assignments at this time.
Okay.
Because the classes are very small also. We talk about 30, 35, 40 officers in each of the classes. That's why the training takes an extended period of time. We found that providing such intensive 40-hour training to a auditorium full of students is not the way to go. We want to ensure that every moment of that time is well spent. We are touching the hearts and minds of the officers involved.
Let's. I would like, since as the liaison to special operations, to put this on our short list of topics for further discussion, at least to figure out if there's some improved way to prioritize the officers who are going to assign to Metro.
Would gladly do so, and we'll take a closer look at that.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Just a couple other questions. On page 8, there's a discussion of the critical infrastructure and the reference to Metro and the 7th Street station. Questions just there is, since the LAPD has taken over the contract, has there been any particular site assessments of those locations, just to understand whether the design or the function of those facilities in any way enable or are helpful in preventing sexual assault or anything along those lines?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. You know, many of these locations are looked at, assessed, and vetted out. We do have constant dialogue with the executive committee of MTA, looking for better ways of addressing hard structure, addressing any of the areas that may be accessible. They're making sure that their ability to lock down certain locations. So those things are looked at, as well as, enhancing camera systems. And so that's an ongoing thing. They allow us to prioritize our requests to them, but again, those things are brought out in open MTA board meetings. But those are often points of discussion every Monday at our executive meetings.
Again, with regard to the Union Station and the 7th Street, has there been any specific site assessments of those two particular facilities?
Site assessments just by us or by outside folks?
Well, I'm asking, so I understand the council has asked this to be one of the issues for the department to address, is to the infrastructure element of the Metro system. And so I'm asking whether the department, in taking over the contract or since taking over the contract, has performed any particular site assessment of these two facilities.
If I could just jump in, the critical infrastructure piece has been evaluated, and they started with 7th and Metro, and that was kind of a joint project that we did with MTA. MTA hired a company that actually went through and mapped the whole site, like we had done at one point a long time ago with our Archangel program. But they created a virtual reality file where you can walk through the system, and it looked at entry points and things like that, and kind of where some of the tunnels led. So it's kind of a site assessment in terms of making sure that that target's hardened. So we can take this virtual file, if you want to call it, and we can actually build kind of virtual tabletop scenarios that we put our officers in MTA through, where we can throw a scenario on there about how they would respond to certain things that are happening down there. So that's the first one. Obviously, Union Station is critical infrastructure, so we're working with MTA to try to get that one to be the next project that is kind of evaluated. But from an operational standpoint, a couple of months ago, we looked at where we had our foot beats, because obviously officers walking in a facility are going to be the best prevention we have for anything that could happen from a safety standpoint, but also in what we're here talking about, prevention of sexual assaults and things like that. So we kind of redirected our resources. We have a foot beat now in Union Station. We've got a permanent foot beat at 7th and Metro. We have one at Pershing Square Station, and we have one at Hollywood and Vine. So those are what I consider our 4 real critical ones right now. And then, as the year progresses, nothing that we do at in transit services is set in stone. We're always trying to find ways to make our deployment more efficient. So we're hoping to expand that model and get a lot of visibility in the stations at, for example, Hollywood and Western and some of those outlying stations.
In referencing the work that am I understanding you correctly that with regard to Union Station that there's some assessment that is in the works or being planned, or is it just generally we're going to do it?
No, we're talking with MTA about doing that one. They just finished the 7th and Metro. It's pretty extensive. Look how they mapped it. It's you can actually walk through with those glasses that kids wear now.
Yeah, no, I get it, but I'm just wanting to clarify with regard to the plan for Union Station. How tight is that plan? Is it just is an aspirational? We're going to do it.
It's aspirational right now,
or is there a specific date and plan?
Right now.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think, Commander Orb, most of my questions I think are directed to you with respect to sexual assault and harassment, and specifically on the data that's being collected. And I'm a little confused, and I apologize. Maybe I'm just not reading the report correctly. But on, I think it was pages 1 and 2, there's information about the number of sexual assaults as reported by the Sheriff's Department, and you note that there may be some disparities because of the way that they count may be slightly different, or their definition of certain crimes. But what I'm not clear about is how is LAPD capturing its data so that LAPD can evaluate the success of its programs. I heard about your reporting on peace over violence, and the number of reports that they're getting has lowered, which is great, and that's a good statistic. And I'm very well aware sexual harassment and assault is an underreported crime, but I want to be sure I understand how LAPD is capturing data since it's taken over at least a portion of the Metro services.
Well, primarily, the information we'll receive are from radio calls. There'll be calls for service. It could be even reported through the rail and bus drivers, but a lot of it's on crime reports, crime-driven statistics that we receive, and then we investigate those like a regular geographic division. And based on that, when we see our crime reporting coming in, is probably the best gauge, even though they are underreported. But we utilize that for our deployment. The reason I brought up peace over violence because that would be the piece that or information that we wouldn't normally get, or the information we wouldn't normally receive. But if it's referred to us, again, once we receive that information, we'll investigate it, create crime reports based on the intel coming to us, and then respond to crime incidents.
So you're capturing the data as it was any other division in the city. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
So you can compare from the time you took over to today in terms of what areas are most in need of services?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner, if I just may add, we have a very robust transit crime analysis detail that I'm sure the team could talk about, but it's very similar to what you'd see at a geographic area. It even drills down to separate platforms and rail lines so we can get a more specific and focused look at sexual assault crimes. And we get a report on that every single week.
Very good. With respect to the information provided on page 5, which is the Red Line, Union Station, et cetera, is that from the Metro, from MTA, or is that from your division?
That information's from us. That's the information we capture through our crime reporting.
That's, okay. And do you also do an analysis with Metro overall about crime trends, or does each police service analyze their own data, or how does that work?
Do you have any intel on that, Mike?
Everything that goes through Metro, they have several ways that commuters, their operators, whether it be bus or rail, can report information, whatever it is that they might see. Basically what they do is they take all of those systems, and if anything rises to a level where they may believe that it's a public safety issue, might be a crime, whatever, all that information is flagged specifically for us, but all of the information is available to us. So we can look through all the complaints, no matter what the avenue for that information to get to Metro, and look at basically every complaint from vandalism to I heard a loud radio to a potential sexual assault or harassment. It also includes things where their employees may be part of the issue that needs to be addressed. Sometimes it is just professionalism, but we have access to all of that. So we have the ability to take monthly reports, their monthly reports, and basically filter them to everything within the city, within the area, and we can pretty much break it down very similar to how we break our information down.
And every Monday, we meet with the MTA executive meeting, and that involves us, MTA, the sheriffs in Long Beach, and we actually have a period of that hour where we go over the crime trends. So we'll start, and then the sheriffs go, and in Long Beach we'll talk about. So we're sitting down once a week, kind of exchanging information about some of the crime patterns we're seeing.
Very good. And do you know whether all the law enforcement agencies use the most current definition of rape, which was, as you know, expanded a number of years ago by the FBI? I'm just curious if you know if it's the more narrow definition that's being applied or the broader definition that the FBI and that I think the LAPD adopted. Do you know?
I don't know their policies specifically, but for us, we adhere to the narrow guideline.
The broader guideline, the broader definition.
Broader guideline,
right,
yes.
Right, but you don't know what the other.
I don't know how the sheriffs address it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, do we have any public comment?
Yes, sir. We have 13 cards. We'll have the first four. We have Reverend Michael Novick, Gina Viola, and the Red Chief.
Go ahead, sir. No.
The first speaker, Reverend.
Reverend, are you waiving your speaking on this? No. Mr. Novick? Reverend, are you waiving or are you going to speak? Okay, so you're waiving. Yeah, he is waiving. We set who goes first or who goes second. Okay? So last chance. You want to speak or no? Okay. Mr. Novick.
To begin, the metro system is one of the bigger drivers of homelessness in Los Angeles. The Gold Line drove up rents in East LA and Highland Park. The Expo Line drove up rents all the way from downtown to Santa Monica. So you're forcing people out of their homes with the metro system, and then you're trying to use criminalization and law enforcement as a way to deal with the problem by hiring 124 cops on overtime. How many tickets do they write for fare beating? How many people do they harass and arrest? None of that's in this report. I wish people would hear from the Labor Community Strategy Center, which brought a civil rights lawsuit and won a federal consent decree about the racial discrimination of the metro system, and forced the addition of service and lowering of fares under the buses in Los Angeles. They're currently waging a campaign to get the cops off the metro system entirely, and they've documented the severe racial disparity in terms of who gets arrested and harassed by LAPD on the trains, primarily black people. So these are the realities we're not dealing with. I find it bizarre that the report about homelessness and mental illness, half of it's about sexual harassment. And I'm curious as to why they asked the question to compare the blue line to other lines. Do they think there's more sexual harassment in South LA, when in fact the data shows there's 20 times more in Hollywood and downtown than there was on the blue line? So I think that from start to finish, this reflects the racism of this city, the racism of the metro system, the racism of the LAPD, and the white supremacist nature of law enforcement in the city. So you're dealing with realities that you refuse to even talk about. How can you possibly come up with policies that will correct those severe systemic problems? You're useless.
Next. No, you waived your time on this, sir?
Did not waive it. You waived it.
Yes, I did.
I did
So
not
I'm
waive
going to
it.
ask you to.
You waived it.
I'm going to ask you to sit down.
No.
Okay. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to give you one more warning,
You
and then
give
I'm
me
going to ask
7
you to leave.
warnings.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting.
That's the second warning.
Okay. We are going to clear the room, and we will continue to do business with the room cleared. We're going to clear the room, please. If we're not going to clear the room, then we're going to go into recess for closed session. Let's go. This is what the city attorney says. No, he doesn't want to hear what 13 of you have to say. Let's go.
You are wrong. Racist, fragile coward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happens, Rev. The devil always runs from God.
That's what they do.
No, we were unable to clear the room. Our choice is to have the room cleared, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, we will, because of this continuing disruption, because you're not willing to leave the room, because the room is not willing to be cleared, we are going into, we are going to continue into closed session now. And
He knows that the city attorney knows that.
we good?
You didn't call a recess.
I don't need any motions or anything? Okay, we're going into closed session.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item numbers 5A1 and 5A2 in accordance with Government Code 54957.
Announce the closed session, then we'll finish up the meeting. Go ahead.
Okay, the Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. In closed session, item number 5A1 was discussed, and the Chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 5A2 was discussed, and the Chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. We're now on item number 2A, sir.
Okay, and we had we had comments, and did any of the people in the room here have comments on 2A?
I believe we have Mr. Herman and Mr. Spindler.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Why is LAPD officers often too quickly to resort to using force against individuals with mental health disabilities? In this crisis under 28 CFR 35.130, parentheses B, parentheses 7, law enforcement and its agencies and officers under TMU and TRO are required to make appropriate efforts to determine whether perceived is the result of disruptive behavior a part of a disability. Pro se Attorney General, Mr. Smith, ADA Section 202, which prohibits discrimination. Yet we challenge ourselves whether or not black represents stress, brown represents tense, and Mr. Chaw from Hollenbach. What did he say on the follow-up of Mr. Santiago Miguel? He said, based on Sergeant Padilla's accusation, we are not trained by the American Psychiatry Association. We are not a depression of bipolar support alliances known as DBSA, nor are we a Mental Health America. National Institute of Mental Health, none of you qualify. Get out of the psychiatry business and stop fucking with people in metro stations. People with disabilities need help. $619 million fucking dollars, and you got nothing to show for it. Fuck you, Eric Garcetti.
So that's right, motherfuckers. We come down here, talk about homeless folk on a metropolitan transportation fucking shit. Every time I ride the red line, I hear two things. Hoo, hoo, and I'm selling you some shit. That's right. And every time I look for an officer of the law, there ain't nobody there. Beatings, yes. Sexual assaults, yes. Drug selling, yes. Homeless urination and defecation in the streets and inside the cars, yes. Ain't no cops. But when my black ass gets off the train, I see 900 LAPD terrorists called sergeants. And what are they looking for? Sir. And I said, I'm not a sir. I am a fucking it. Well, it, sir, may I see your tap card? I says, nigga, that tap card deep in my bag. I want to see your tap card to see if you paid your fucking fees or if you got lucky and lost it. So I can write your ass a big fucking ticket to send you to Metro Court because the Metro has its own court over there in the great goddamn building of the MTA. And you walk in there, and what happens? Everybody there got no money. And as soon as they walk in, you fucking search for warrants, and you find the warrants. And next thing, Beatrice Jamala comes up to you, beat you in the fucking head, and says, you got a warrant from 2014. You got one from 2010. You got another warrant. And we screaming, help, Mr. Butter, help. Stop the terrorism, Mr.
And we have no other cards on this item?
I'm going to move that we recommend that we review and transmit this report to City Council and Public Safety Committee. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, on 2B, do we have any commissioner comments on 2B? Do we have any public comments on 2B?
We have none, sir.
Okay, motion for approval of the department's report.
I'll move that. Second.
All in favor? Aye. On item number C, do we have any commissioner comments on item number 2C? Do you have any I'm sorry? Yes. Okay.
To whom am I directing the question?
Let's see.
Okay, great.
Is Nancy here? Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I heard the chairs getting up. I didn't hear you say that.
All right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so just a couple of questions. One is the Motorola Solutions, are they the department's exclusive provider of these services?
Yes, my name is Nancy Camarada. I'm the contract section officer in charge. The Motorola has the contract that oversees the maintenance of the existing CAD system for the dispatch system.
Okay.
Which is Motorola equipment, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
And in terms of the amendment, the 5 years, the additional years, does the existing term or the amendment, does that bear any relationship to the useful life of the equipment that they're monitoring or managing,
Really
or
good
what's
question.
the relevance?
I'm going to defer on that to Rhonda Johnson.
Rhonda Johnson, project manager with LAPD. Yes, it is directly related to the maintenance of the existing systems to continue the life. So it's for the
Hold on for a second. Spindler, can you please stop disrupting? I can't hear. So please stop. Herman, please stop. I can't hear. This is important. So stop or you're going to be leaving this room. Go ahead.
We have systems upgrade agreements that are projected out for 5 years so that we would have know the projected cost of the maintenance and warranty for the existing systems. So that's what we're asking to continue.
Okay, but I want to try and be clear. Tell me if I'm not asking the same question. When we go for new equipment next time, this contract will be up at the same time. Okay. So we may or may not get Motorola equipment, and if so, yeah, that was the question.
Well, I'm also asking a variation on that theme in terms of the existing equipment, which when it was purchased, licensed, however we acquire it, was there a useful life? Like, did someone say this equipment is going to last for 20 years or 15 years? So
Yes.
the one question is, what is the expected useful life? And then I'm just confirming that the amendment, the five additional years, is that tied to the expected useful life of the equipment as well? I mean, are they?
Yes, it directly goes into the life expectancy of the equipment, and it covers the police department for any changes or upgrades to that equipment. So if something happens and they stop servicing that equipment or creating that model of equipment, we'll be able to get the next version in the included cost, so it won't cost the department any extra fees.
But is the equipment that we're talking about expected to last more than 5 years, or is
Yes. Yes, sir.
So it's okay. So that's what I mean. So it's not this 5 years is not tied to the expected life of the. So you may have 5 years, and the equipment may still be in use, and you may need a further amendment.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a motion for.
We have
public comment?
yes, sir. We have Mr. Herman. And Mr. Spindler.
What number?
2C.
2C. 2C. 2A, 2B. Oh, 2C. Right. 2C. As you heard in our public testimony regarding Motorola, its solutions, under case number C123897, it says the department's report was to transmit to the mayor. Do any one of you know who the name of the mayor is of Los Angeles? Has anyone seen the active mayor of Los Angeles? Because based on recommendations, and I, being the legislative body under 54950, have a recommendation. That recommendation is not to report the negativity of Motorola, but it's to describe a practice and pattern by the Los Angeles Police Department, Mr. Mark P. Smith. And that is whether or not the mayor has engaged in criminal activity in response of the 2019 approval of Motorola Solution INC DBA. So on behalf of public interest, and to no offense to anyone about the Brown Act, all I can say about my mayor, your mayor, and the Angelenos of Los Angeles, nicely, because I don't want to offend anybody, fuck the mayor.
Right. So this is what we got here. The stain of Mitchell Englander is on this contract. Motorola Solutions. Remember, the chairman of the Public Safety Committee made these deals with Motorola. Where is he now? Cooperating with the feds. That's right, and that means Motorola Solutions is fucked because you got to cancel this contract right now. Old radios, old broken down radios. And the only person on the commission that's ever used a police radio and actually got it to work was Commissioner Bonner. Eileen Decker tried to use one. She couldn't get it to work. Mr. Soboroff tried to get it to work, but he suffers from senility and couldn't remember to turn it on. And then, of course, the other two ladies could give a fucking shit about the radios. So that's why we need simple radios. They're called cell phones. That's right. AT&T's the choice for your new radio contract. Just get the right choice. 5G coming in. You could use 5G technology for your new radio system. How cheap it would be if you just wait for the rollout. Wait for the beauty of 5G as they irradiate us all with those wonderful antennas, and we all start going insane, and we all start slapping our women just like the Dodgers did today. That's right. So 5G can be operating these radios. But you're not waiting. You're not waiting for the technology. You're going to use this old 1995 technology? That's fucking old fucking shit. Give Mr. Bonner credit. He's the only one with credibility. Eileen Decker, you know that.
Sorry. I'll move approval of the of item number 2C, approve the department's report, transmit to the mayor. We have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. 2D,
One comment card. We have Wayne from
wait,
Encino.
let's see, do we have any commissioner comments on the fee adjustments? You do? Okay, go ahead.
Just to begin, Mr. Tiefang, could you just begin by explaining why the changes are being made and how the new fees are being calculated?
Yes, Commissioner. The new fees are required to be adjusted each fiscal year by the city. What we take into account as we make the fee adjustments are the salaries of the employees, the time and motion it takes to do the particular function that they have to do, and what is called the cost allocation plan, which is the benefit rate for civilian employees and sworn employees of the city. That cost allocation plan rate is set by the Controller's Office, and it is different for each position. Our civilian employees in the LAPD have one cost allocation plan. The civilian employees in the Office of Finance have another. Sworn LAPD officers have a cost allocation plan if they're non-field employees, and a different cost allocation plan if they're field employees. The differences calculates overtime and a variety of other factors into those numbers that come up with that percentage. We're given the guidelines on the process and how to calculate the time. So the increases are based on the cost allocation plan being adjusted, postage, et cetera, printing costs, et cetera, being adjusted to come up with the new rates.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you explain why the impact is so, when you add that all up, what you just said, why is that so resulting in such a dramatic increase with regard to the press passes?
The press pass information is coming from the department. The staff that does that work, they give us the time and motion it takes to do that. Again, the cap rates for the involved employees, the sworn employees, and civilian employees would impact that. And it's a relatively small number now. It's going from $42 to $63. So it's an increase of $21.
Yeah, but it's a 50, if I'm reading this correct, it's a 50% increase, right?
And that would come about from the cap rates and the time and motion that the department says it takes to do those particular functions.
Do we know what that trend line is? I mean, is this particular year just we would expect it'll stay relatively close to that every year, or is there some reason why this year was a
I can tell you that generally it's been within that dollar amount between $25 to $50 for the past several years that we've been here. And the big impact to it is the cap rate. That's the big piece, because the cap rate, as you could see, went up significantly for the civilian personnel. It went from 98.9% last year to 177.24% this year. And then for the sworn overhead without field support, it decreased by 11.14% on the cap rate. So the civilians are probably the highest piece of that. And again, the cap rate went up significantly, including salary adjustments that factor into that. So if civilian personnel have a salary increase, which they did, then you add the cap rate to that, that causes the increase.
Great, thank you.
Were there any public comments on item number 2D?
We have Wayne from Encino and Mr. Herman.
Okay. Herman, you want to get up behind him so we don't have to wait? Go ahead.
Get your ass up there. Your master talking to you. Hey, you know, you gotta raise the fee on trespassing. See, Steve Soboroff knows what happened. You let Daniel Gus get a press pass. And they ain't gonna let that shit happen again. No, sirree, bub. That's right. Because if that guy gets a press pass, everybody in the room here is a journalist can get a press pass. So they gotta raise the fees real high, Mr. Potter, to make sure citizen journalists never get one of those motherfuckers again. I mean, it's great, isn't it, that all of these intelligentsia jack-offs in this fucking room allow a guy writing for a blog for no money to get a fucking press pass. I mean, can you believe that with free parking? Free access, you don't even have to be screened. It's so fucking funny. Look at T-Fake, that jack-off let fucking Dad get a fucking press pass. It's so fucking funny. You people are such fucking jack-offs. So that's why they gotta make the fees go up, and they gotta do new rules now. Because that guy, he threatened to sue your ass, didn't he? That's what I heard. And then all of a sudden they go, you could do 2 years. That's right. The citizens get a press pass. God bless the Constitution. God bless Carol Sobel, who told these fuckers that they're discriminating. So it's good. Now you raise the fee because next month you're going to get a new application for a press pass. It's going to come from me. I'm going to be a member of the Fourth Estate. I'm going to be reporting here. I'm not going to practice law. I'm going to practice journalism and put all your asses in jail. Me and Mr. Potter arrest your asses because Mr. Potter's innocent. You're all going to
Next speaker.
Brought my press pass. Got my press pass. And civilians, those of you involved with these new fees and charges, nothing more but rates. We're being berated by y'all. You know, allocation costs. We need adjustments. And we're going to make these adjustments based on the racism of what discrimination is against a journalist. Thank you, Dan Gus, for suing the Los Angeles Police Department when they took your press pass or tried to enforce regulations based on what a press pass of 20 measly fucking dollars or $50 that I don't have because I'm disabled based on City Watch News. Service fees for niggas with physical impact statements is here. This is my press pass. I'm a civilian, nonprofit, pro boner, telling you all I brought my press pass to make public
President,
testimony.
This is not about him. It's about
allocations and rates. This is about rates, Mr. Soboroff.
Mr. President, he's off topic.
Okay.
Didn't we
Time's
talk
up.
about...
Time's up. Your time's up. No, you don't have 30 seconds. Do you want to sit down or do you want me to ask you to leave? Got a choice. Go sit. Thank you.
We have no other cards on this item, sir.
I'll move approval of the executive director's report and transmit to the city administrative officer and the chief legislative analyst. Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to the chief's report.
Thank you, President Soboroff, Commissioners, Mr. T-Fink, Mr. Smith. This is an overview to begin with of the year-to-date crime picture, week ending May 11th. Homicides are down year-to-date by 1.15%. That puts us at 86 versus 2018 number, which was 87. Shooting victims, however, are up 71, and that's a 25.9% year-to-date increase. So year-to-date, 345 people were victims of gun violence in the city of Los Angeles versus 274 at this time in 2018. Looking at citywide Part 1 crime numbers, down 6.8%, specifically with violent crime down 4.1%, property crime down citywide 7.6%. Turning to gang crime, year-to-date is up 8.9%, and year-to-date gang-related shooting victims are up 29.8%. Turning to traffic-related information, while overall traffic collisions are down in the city of Los Angeles 2.3%, as we look at citywide traffic collisions where we had serious injuries or fatalities, we are down only 0.4%. One of the trends we're watching carefully are DUI-related traffic collisions, which are up with 6 additional victims this time last year. 26 people lost their lives or were seriously injured in DUI-related traffic collisions. This year, we are at 32. We are looking at task force operations using Vision Zero funding and STEP grant funding to maintain a better and more watchful eye on DUI-related traffic collisions citywide. With regard to bicycle-involved traffic collisions with serious injury or death, we're looking at 42 year-to-date. That's the same number as this time last year in 2018. The brighter part of this picture is bicycle-involved traffic collisions overall in the city of Los Angeles are down 19.82%. Now turning to a total of officer-involved shootings year-to-date, we are down 41.7%. So year-to-date, we are at 7 versus 12 at this time last year. Looking at our personnel strength, we're at sworn numbers of 9,974 deployed. Our civilian numbers for deployed are 2,980. We are still carrying a vacancy rate of 431 civilian personnel. Reserve officers are numbering at 387, cadets at 1,428, and we have an upcoming graduation at the end of this week on Saturday. Looking at past week's events, a few I'd like to share with you. LAPD had its first ever iftar celebration for the month of Ramadan right here in police headquarters. We had over 70 people attend, including our brothers and sisters of the Muslim faith. We also had many denominations represented, including those from the Jewish community. Rabbi Cooper participated, Pastor Boyd. In addition, the Consul General of Sri Lanka came and provided some information on the tragedies from her country, but also enjoyed fellowship with us as well. Also, the Los Angeles City Human Relations Commission was represented by Dr. Quasi and helped to facilitate some of the discussion. Fellowship also was shared in terms of food and a dinner after prayer. I wanted to really loan my sincere thanks to Community Engagement Group under the eye of Commander Gerald Woodyard and Sergeant Luke Watkins, who brought that event together. It was something very beautiful to see, and also we hope to replicate it in years to come. We also had the LGBTQ Chiefs Forum, which was held in Hollywood area at the Ricardo Montalban Theater, greatly attended by all facets of the community. I also want to thank IG Mark Smith for being there. He also spoke to those in attendance, and I think it was good discussion. The chief took many question and answers in the Q&A portion as well. We also had recruit graduation on May the 10th. 43 individuals graduated, 33 males, 10 females. One went to USC, Department of Public Safety, and 4 to LAWA. We thank Steve Soboroff for making his remarks there as well. And I think it was a very enjoyable event. Family enjoyed it as well, even though we were relegated to the auditorium for that celebration. Last, we had the Police Academy Magnet School graduation, also known as PAMS, that took place on Saturday. There were over 150 children that graduated that, both from middle school and from seniors in high school. 11 of the members of the PAMS program were previously cadets. And we thought that was great because we're seeing that continued service calling by these 11 cadets. Also, 32% of the graduates showed an interest in a future in law enforcement, and we're glad to see that as well. Austin Butner, Chief Zipperman from the Los Angeles School Police Department were there as well, and we had fellowship that was provided by the Los Angeles Police Revolver and Athletic Club. And that concludes my report.
Any questions of the chief? Thank you, Chief. Any public comments?
We have Wayne Spindler and Mr. Herman.
Okay.
So that is so nice that you honor Ramadan. There is nothing better than the LAPD offering their condolences to all of the 9/11 hijackers and honoring the holiday of terrorism. Thank you so much. It reminds us all every year how fucking meaningless the FBI is and how the Department of Justice allows Twin Towers to fall. And we have to sit there and watch you cater to a fucking group of people that kill Americans at will. And it is good. Because one thing we like is creative destruction, do we not? Yes, sir. Think of all of the wonderful Muslim activities out there. Think of all of the good things that they do. I want to celebrate Ramadan. Yes, sir. I love all of the things, going back to blowing up the ships in Yemen in the 90s, where we had to go over there and clean up that shit. Then we had to go and we had to watch the Twin Towers go down and all of the lovely fucking Muslims. And we just love your fucking religion. No, yeah, we reach a Ramadan. You want to reach a Ramadan? You fucking cocksuckers. You have no idea. I know people that died in them fucking plane attacks. One of them was Doris Meisner's husband, was the head of the INS commission. Her husband fucking died in one of those fucking planes that went into one of those fucking buildings. I bet she'd like to celebrate fucking Ramadan. You guys, every fucking thing that you guys do is to infuriate every single person who's a veteran, every single person that's a former agent, every single person that knows somebody that died in combat. Well, you PC cocksuckers tell us how we're supposed to accept everything. What about the people that died? What about all the people that died? You don't give a fucking shit about it.
Next speaker.
Mr. Herman, please.
You can leave. You can leave the room. You've been disruptive after your time. You can leave the room. Leave the room. What? You leave the room. I gave you a warning. No, you didn't. You kept talking. You kept disrupting the meeting. Leave the room. Officers, please remove him.
That's all you do. You know how you fucking make people feel? Ramadan? All of that fucking...
Mr. Spindler continues to disrupt instead of leaving the room.
You're continuing to disrupt the meeting. Spindler, leave the room. Spindler. Okay.
Mr. Spindler is preventing the speaker at the podium from speaking.
Okay, go ahead, Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler, for those recommendations. But the chief report talked about incidents around bicyclists. Unfortunately, these road diets have significantly impacted our safety. And Beatrice is aware of that, and I want to thank her for her great formalities, pattern and practice to allocate a decision about these accidents. And that was her opinion. But regarding a 41% murder rate down, I find that inconclusive. For some reason, my mental health tells me that there are more people being killed in Los Angeles like they were in the days of Chicago. Unfortunately, y'all, I got two personalities. And excessive force has been a condition where people violently are killed in Los Angeles. We become the hit and run capital of the world. We didn't talk about that. All that stuff about racing cars up and down our streets, killing people, police pursuits that engage people to conduct the business of crashes and vehicular manslaughter is out of control. Just a couple of years ago, those tourists were killed at the Venice Beach Boardwalk. Now we're celebrating our graduates. Yeah, our graduates. Who are they? They're the same cadets known under why police are fucking cadets.
We have no other comment cards on this item.
Public comments?
Public comment, we have Jeffrey Delshad, Angela De Jesus, and Mr. Herman.
Okay. Mr. Delshad?
Mr. Soboroff? Good afternoon. No longer good morning. Okay, I had a few bullets here I thought I could address. First, I was having dinner with my family, and they were wondering why I do things like come to this meeting. And as the discussion went in circles, they were wondering, like, you know, what are the racial or ethnic demographic? And I was telling them, like, it's kind of mirrors the, like, Hispanic, black, white of the city. But it occurred to me, like, there's like 50% women in America, but it's not 50% women officers. So that's not really it's not a mirror of the demographic of the city. Regarding a lot of the other things, sometimes the public go off about maybe certain sensitivity, power issues, stuff like that. It occurred to me that more women might be a step in a direction that would be like making the public happier, maybe doing a better job at some of the ideals and things. Okay, that's one. Second bullet, I thought burnout, since you have like IG and you do all these studies and stuff, you know, we were kind of like discussing that it seems like there's a high rate of burnout, like when you look at the academy classes and then like 20 years later, those people aren't there. I know I had one friend or acquaintance from high school who was actually LAPD, and he transferred to Santa Monica. During times I've been arrested, I've made conversations with officers, and I've noticed that they comment that they don't seem to like think that being on patrol or like generally being a officer is like a necessarily where people want to be. So maybe that's something you could improve as far as like morale. And then I guess on a positive note, I saw some officers using their blinkers and driving better since that the driving was brought up a few weeks ago. So that's good. And thank you for if you've made something about that.
Okay. Morning.
Good afternoon, Chief of Police and Board of Police Commissioners. I have created a binder and included a CD that you can share with your board members. I have copies of my letter of concern and have attached the table of contents of what the binder contains for the board members. Chief and board members, I ask that you please review the information carefully and follow up on it. This is the second time that I have come to the LAPD Commissioners meeting to address my son being attacked by LAPD Officer Mario Cardona. The former Chief of Police did not handle the police brutality that occurred properly, but I am hopeful that you will. On January 9th, 2019, I met with Internal Affairs Police Special Investigator to ask that they further investigate the current findings. There is an abundance of evidence that shows how Officer Mario Cardona has conspired, lied, and covered up the truth in order to escape accountability for his crimes. There is factual evidence that proves why Officer Cardona has been found guilty and that he acted with malice in the civil case Daniel Garza versus the City of Los Angeles, Officer Mario Cardona, and Police Chief Charlie Beck. My son was the victim of an evil plot that Officer Cardona created. Officer Cardona tried to ruin my son's life. Since Officer Cardona attacked my son in May 2015, he has been promoted not once, but twice. His wife, Sherry Cardona, has been promoted to Internal Affairs. This is clearly an abuse of power.
Thank you. Oh, do we have any other
Mr.
public
Herman?
comments?
To the city offices to attend council and committee meetings that must maintain not less than 10 yards distance. Now, what I'm reading here is a matter of subject, how the LAPD's Threat Management Unit officers resort too quickly to using excessive force. Just last week when Steve Soboroff ordered me removed and your officers, all of them there, with the recorders, as you clearly see that I had my hands up and you intentionally grabbed my service dog, fuck you. You do not handle the handler's service dog, for you violate federal law. You fuck with people mentally, you fuck with people with the TMU, and you fuck with people with the TRO. If I'm such a fucking threat simply because I speak profanity, I intensify vulgarity, it's protected speech. And no motherfucker is going to censor or monitor my free speech, Mr. Soboroff. So tell Patty, Mr. Herman will come to all the meetings, will participate in all the meetings, and under 42 U.S.C. 1983 on behalf of Wayne Spillner, fuck you, Mr. Soboroff, and your billion-dollar development. I hope Eric Garcetti and you both go before the FBI internal investigation with Jose Huizar for fucking with people under strategic lawsuits against the public.
We have no other comment cards, sir.
Okay, before we adjourn, Commissioner Decker, is it?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to note before we conclude today that frequently during these commission meetings in public comment, we hear from individuals that in the exercise of their First Amendment rights express themselves in such a way that I think most people would consider to constitute hate speech. And I'd just like to note that this commission, its individuals or as a group, does not condone such speech, but accepts that people who come to this commission meeting in this forum are entitled to express themselves with that form of speech. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye.